Hello, my name's Olu Osha. I like talking about American presidents. Today, I want to continue my discussion on the conspiracy theories surrounding the assassination of our 35th president, John F. Kennedy. Of course, on November 22nd, 1963, in Dallas, Texas, John F. Kennedy was assassinated by Lee Harvey Oswald. This subsequently you know, uh, spawned a number of conspiracy theories, especially since uh, Lee Harvey Oswald, the apparent killer, was killed 2 days after, 2 days later by a guy called Jack Ruby. Jack Ruby is said to have had some kind of uh, mob ties. He ran a strip club, and so yes, he probably had mob ties. As mob stars would say. I like to watch a guy called a former mob boss's show. His name's Michael Fran Fran Franzesi. Franzesi. I don't know how to pronounce his name. It's an Italian name, but he has his own theories as well. He also claims that he thinks it was JFK's assassination was a mob hit. I don't believe that's the case, and I'll do subsequent videos discrediting that. The mob, it is said, had worked closely with the CIA to try and get Fidel Castro overthrown or killed. And so I'll do a subsequent video just uh, discrediting, debunking the conspiracy theory that the CIA or any government agency got, or even the mob got JFK assassinated. Again, I've mentioned before that uh, any agency within the United States government killing, the leader of the United States government, given, the nature of our government, our constitutional democracy, it would be tantamount to having a Frankensteinian system or orthothesis. Orthothesis is when an organism is built to self-destruct, commits, suicide, right? So that's what would be the case, right? And that hasn't happened. Our form of government has uh, become stronger. We haven't done away with uh, democratic elections, and voter participation has actually increased. If we had such a system where we had a deep state that could actually assassinate the president with impunity, then there would be a big risk to that rogue unit, right? To that unit, uh, deep state or whatever you want to call it. It would be very precarious for them to have elections that are unpredictable, to leave the public, right, to be able to have the ability through the vote to pick a president, because it would always threaten their existence. Such a deep state wants control and would want to hold on to control. Even our founding founders like Alexander Hamilton, he understood this when he said, he did initially, of course, at the beginning of our democracy, our republic, voters, the public didn't select the president. It was actually an electoral college electors who selected our president. And because Alexander Hamilton argued that, the voting public, they're unpredictable, right? They're unpredictable. And so if we indeed had a deep state, it would be orthothesis for them to live voting the selection of our government in the hands of the voting public. So that's not the case. That did not happen. It's counterintuitive. In any event, today what I want to talk about is I want to spend time debunking the conspiracy theory that LBJ had JFK killed. So a lot of the conspiracy theories, the main The main themes come from a book by a lawyer called Bar McClellan. He wrote this book much later, after, decades after the events had occurred. Bar McClellan wrote a book called Blood, Money, and Power: How LBJ Killed JFK. And a lot of what he does is based on rumors and gossip, nothing firsthand. He wasn't involved. He wasn't a participant in any attempts or conspiracy to have JFK killed. This is something that he heard somebody else say, and so that's called hearsay in law, and it would be inadmissible in a court of law, right? But notwithstanding, that doesn't mean that, the fact that something's inadmissible in a court of law does not mean that, well, it can't be a fact. But the thing is, people have debunked Bar McClellan's work as blasphemous lies and, not credible. And his sources are people have been called pathological liars, such as Billy Sol Estes, right? An uneducated, convicted felon, for swindling and, fraudulent activities. That's Billy Sol Estes, right? He had a brief interaction with Lyndon B. Johnson, and he was a Texas businessman who was convicted, and during his time in prison, he tried to get a pardon and reduction of his sentence by coming up spinning all these tales about LBJ's knowledge of LBJ's involvement with murders, previous murders, right, including the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Billy Sol Estes was somebody who was constantly seeking attention, right, and he's been described as a pathological liar. And he got involved in a book in which he was paid, he claims to have been paid a couple of hundreds of thousands of dollars, right, in which he made these false claims as well, linking LBJ to the assassination of John F. Kennedy. In addition, there's a guy called Douglas Caddy. He also started to spin these false rumors, this gossip, right, based on hearsay. And Douglas Caddy had sent a letter to the Department of Justice and claiming that Billy Sol Estes, the fraudster, and Lyndon B. Johnson, and another guy who was a factotum, or you can call him a Man Friday or hitman of Lyndon B. Johnson. His name was Malcolm Wallace. That these men were associates and had been involved in several murders. So this was decades after these ostensible events had occurred. And so this is not credible, right? It's just, your men. In fact, these men were dead. Most of these men, LBJ was long dead, Mac Wallace was dead, and you're making these accusations when the culprits are no longer alive. The dead can't defend themselves. And so, in any event, let me start with the claims by Bob McClellan. So Bob McClellan focuses on the death of Lyndon B. Johnson's sister, right? He had a sister who had a checkered past, and she ostensibly, according to Bob McClellan, had a drug addiction problem. She had a history of failed marriages. Her name was Josepha Johnson, and she herself died on Christmas Day in 1961, ostensibly from a brain hemorrhage, cerebral brain hemorrhage, and there was no autopsy done. And their claims, Douglas Caddy made claims that LBJ was involved in her death to silence her because he had presidential aspirations. So Josepha Johnson was supposed to have been very instrumental in the campaigns, played a prominent role in the campaign for the LBJ Senate run in 1948. It was a very controversial Senate run. So LBJ was supposed to have won by just 87 votes, right? He won the primaries, Democratic primaries, against his rival Coke Stevenson, who had apparently been ahead initially by 20,000 votes, but somehow a controversial ballot box came in. It's known as the Box 13 scandal, in which there were all these votes in alphabetical order, all written in the same pen, in the same handwriting, that gave LBJ the slim 87 vote victory. It came from Jim Wells County. So Josepha Johnson is supposed to have, been aware of LBJ's past corrupt activities, including, ostensible voter fraud from this county, Jim Wells County, which led to his victory, right? And ostensibly, she had a boyfriend, a guy called John Kinzer, who was aware of, the way LBJ won his senatorial seats, that it was through corrupt activities and it was involved in some other corrupt practices. And so John Kinzer was supposedly having an affair with Josepha Johnson. And so he was trying to use Josepha Johnson to blackmail Lyndon B. Johnson for money. And so Johnson's factotum, Mac Wallace, was supposed to have gone over to John Kinzer's golf course club. John Kinzer was a businessman who owned a golf course or something. And Mac Wallace apparently shot him to death, killed him, and he was subsequently arrested. In court, Mac Wallace's attorney revealed that, John Kinzer was actually having an affair with Mac Wallace's wife, right? So Mac Wallace was married, and Mac Wallace apparently was also having an affair with Josepha Johnson, even though he was married. And so John Kinzer was supposed to have been having an affair with Josepha Johnson, who was a mistress to Mac Wallace, and at the same time was having an affair with Mac Wallace's wife. And so Mac Wallace was eventually convicted of murder with malice aforethought. However, the judge, and even the judge, would overturn the sentence, right? And he was given just a 5-year suspended sentence. Now, what's interesting is that because he was an associate of Lyndon Johnson at the time, LBJ was said to have arranged for his attorney to represent Mac Wallace, and also he got another attorney and close associate of his, Edward Clark, to get him released on bond, to arrange his bail. So it is claimed that Edward Clark was involved in a conspiracy with LBJ to get John F. Kennedy assassinated, and that Mac Wallace was one of the people who pulled the trigger. There are these disputes over the number of wounds and shots that JFK suffered in the assassination, and there's this theory of the magic bullet. A lot of these, the results of these investigations and the evidence are now available. Of course, you can find the videos online. In fact, the examiner who did the autopsy said, I watched his deposition in which he claimed that there were JFK suffered 4 injuries, right? 4 gunshot wounds. And so there's always been this dispute that Lee Harvey Oswald could not have been the lone shooter, that somebody else, uh, fired at LBJ. Sorry, somebody else also fired at John F. Kennedy. There are these claims that there was there was smoke, a gunshot. Somebody else must have fired from the bushes, right? And Lee Harvey Oswald was supposed to have fired from a building, a warehouse where he worked, from a window. So, there was a shot that also hit the Texas governor who was riding in the same vehicle with JFK and the First Lady, Jackie Kennedy. So all these, the forensic evidence, the way it's, and the fact that the Warren Commission itself apparently was covering up, and somebody who was on the Warren Commission, I'm going to get into it in a subsequent video, was Alan Dulles. Alan Dulles was the discredited CIA director who was fired by John F. Kennedy following the failure of the Bay of Pigs invasion. And Alan Dulles himself was actually on the Warren Commission. And so there have been these claims of cover-up. In any event, I'm going to go back to the associates of LBJ. And so it is said that these claims that Mac Wallace himself was one of the shooters, right? So Mac Wallace has this notorious background. He'd actually been a government official in Texas. He had to, he had to resign because of his relationship with LBJ, and following, especially following his scandalous activities. So Mac Wallace himself, actually, he died later on in what was called a staged automobile accident, right? So that was in 1971, long after the incident. So in the book, Bob McClellan is making these claims that just because LBJ had these unsavory associates, that's Mac Wallace, his henchmen who fixed things for him, and Billy Sola Estes. Billy Sol Estes, however, has a very tangential relationship with LBJ. There's no evidence that they were close associates. The nature of LBJ was he was a politician, and he was one of those. He was a traditional Texas politician, and of course, you want to expand your influence. You want to you want to get into photo ops with people you're not really close to, but you want to, because you never know how they can help you later on. Now, another reason why people have linked LBJ, they've tried to say, well, he's such an unsavory person, he has an unsavory past, and so he had this shady background that he's got to be involved in some kind of conspiracy to kill President Kennedy, especially since he was his successor, and because the assassination occurred in Texas, right, where JFK was from, where he represented, right? But that would clearly make him the number one suspect, right? A strong reason why he would why it would not be him. It wouldn't make sense. It would it would just put all the scrutiny on LBJ. The fact that it's happening in Texas, right? So Something else that that I was going to just mention was LBJ's his business activities. It is known that LBJ became very wealthy. Of course, he was born poor, but by the time of his death, he had a net worth of about $130 million. He had amassed a fortune, a media empire, and so he was actually one of our wealthiest presidents. But again, we know that his wealth came as a result of his wife's inheritance. His wife had inherited, about $17,500 from her dad, in the 1940s, and she invested a lot of this in buying a TV station and in the media. Now, yes, did LBJ use his position as a senator, as a politician, to expand his wife's media empire? Very likely, because LBJ apparently was chairman of the FCC, which is, of course, the Federal Communications Commission. So this, of course, was, it put him in a position to be able to obtain favorable licenses and rulings on behalf of his wife's station and media empire, which did grow. But that doesn't make him a killer, right? So he's doing something that was very consistent with what a number of politicians are known to do. They do benefit, from using their influence to favor friends and family, right? But that doesn't make them killers, or that they'll go into something as crazy as having the president killed, when the direct beneficiary would be them, and everybody would actually be looking at them that, well, you had the biggest motive to do this. That would be crazy. And LBJ was not a stupid man, right? So so you can dismiss, the issue of LBJ's wealth, right? His financial dealings as being a reason, just because, yes, he did benefit his wife's media empire. That doesn't mean that, it gives him the character, or the personality to want to have the president eliminated. And of course, there are these discredited claims that his wife had a helicopter and ammunitions company that was benefiting from the Vietnam War, and because JFK showed indications that he was trying to withdraw from the Vietnam War, and so he had him killed so that his wife could benefit. Again, these are discredited conspiracy theories that just come up from various places. There's no evidence whatsoever that his wife owned a helicopter or ammunitions company, right? There was also this discredited claim that it was that there was a Texas oil interest. There was a Texas oil interest that would benefit from the death of John F. Kennedy, by saving $100 million, because John F. Kennedy had shown, had indicated he was going to increase the depletion allowance tax, right, on oil. $100 million is not a lot of money to face the death penalty and the destruction of your organization, right? LBJ, by the time of his death, had a net worth of $130 million. So $100 million is not a lot of money. So back to the issue of LBJ's sister, Josepha Johnson. The fact that the claims that LBJ must have had her killed because she was aware of his corrupt activities in getting himself elected as senator in 1948, and John Kinzer was trying to use her to blackmail LBJ, and that was the reason why Mac Wallace had killed John Kinzer, and ostensibly on behalf of LBJ, because he had presidential ambitions. Okay, again, that's another crazy harebrained reason, right? So there was a political party machine in Texas. I've done earlier videos in which I talk about the influence of political party machines at the beginning of our democracy, especially in the 19th century. I talked about Roscoe Conklin, the party boss in the Republican Party, who actually was almost elected. He was elected. He was nominated, elected. He was confirmed, but he declined to be Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court twice. In fact, including Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, he was a political party boss in the Republican Party. That's Roscoe Conklin of New York. I've talked about the Tammany Hall Society, which was influential in New York City. I've talked about the Albany Regency, which was led by a former president, Martin Van Buren. So yes, I've also mentioned that the South had its political party machines as well, right? And so this was par for the course. It wasn't something that, but it wasn't a reason to want to cover up. You're trying to cover up your association with the activities of a political party boss and then have people killed because of that. No, that was just part of our history. Many presidents have been picked through the activities of party bosses, right, in the past. So, by the way, let me just mention, it's funny I said par for the course. So the political party boss that ostensibly apparently helped LBJ win his senatorial run in 1948 was a guy called George Parr. So he was also called the Duke of Duval. And George Parr was he had the Parr political machine in Texas, right? And Jim Wells County, which was responsible for the 87 votes which LBJ defeated his Democratic primary rival with. That was Coke Stevenson. He defeated him by 87 votes, and LBJ earned a sobriquet, an ironic sobriquet of Landslide Johnson, just because he defeated Coke Johnson by just 87 votes. Now, George Parr was supposed to have been responsible for the political maneuvering that got those votes. So George Parr was supposed to have been someone who was involved in bribery, fraud, so many other scandals. He was a political party boss. But what's ironic is he was also a lawyer and he was a county judge. He was a county judge. He was a judge, but he was also a party machine boss, right? He was known as Duke of Duval. George Parr was supposed to have been convicted for tax evasion very early. And so he did some time in prison, but he wanted to revive his political influence. And so it is said that LBJ, while he was a congressman, was the one who got Harry Truman to issue a pardon, restoring the civil rights of George Parr, so he could continue with his influencing politics in Texas. And so they said, as a favor, that George Parr was supposed to have helped LBJ win the Democratic primaries in his 1948 run for the Senate. In any event, these things, so again, that's, yes, political party machines was just part of, it was par for the course. It was part of our political process. in the past. This is no longer the case. But again, that's no reason for LBJ to have been involved in assassinations to cover up something that was just, again, it was par for the course. Uh, so unfortunately, the book by Bob McClellan, that's Blood, Money, and Power, How LBJ Killed JFK, was just a defamatory book. Uh, and the claims of Billy Saul Estes, who was a convicted felon and fraudster and would say anything, was a pathological liar, was also defamatory. LBJ did a lot of very important things. It was unfortunate that Lee Harvey Oswald, uh, for his reasons, assassinated John F. Kennedy, and LBJ did succeed John F. Kennedy, and LBJ did a lot as president. He achieved a lot. Uh, Unfortunately, of course, there's the weakness, the quagmire um, of the legacy of the Vietnam War, which he exacerbated, which he escalated. He didn't start the Vietnam War, but LBJ accomplished a lot of things, including the 1964 Civil Rights Act, the 1965 Voting Rights Act, the Great Society programs, and he achieved a lot for modern America as we know it. Even as a senator, right? LBJ did accomplish a lot. LBJ was very instrumental in the legislation that created NASA, right? So this is, it is very important that to point out LBJ's legacy as president and as a politician and as a public servant. Uh, Despite the smear campaign that went on, to tarnish his legacy and reputation after his death. In any event, I think I'm going to stop here. So these are just discredited rumors that are baseless, that LBJ was involved in any way with the assassination of JFK or even any of those previous deaths, right? Uh, they're not strong enough reasons. So LBJ would have his sister, who, by the way, was said to have been involved in prostitution and was a drug addict, and he'd have her killed just because she was going to be saying things. LBJ, by the way, he had a legal mind. He had been briefly enrolled at Georgetown University Law School. It's called Georgetown, is it Law Center or whatever? But he was in the Law School of Georgetown. He didn't graduate with a degree, but he had a legal mind, and sometimes you understand the best way to deal with certain people who lack credibility is just to be silent. And why would he why would LBJ have his sister killed because she's running her mouth? He knows she lacks credibility. She's a drug addict, she's been involved in prostitution, she's just going to say anything. She lacks credibility. That's not a reason to get his sister killed, right? So these are just harebrained, uh, bogus, groundless claims and rumors and gossip, just because in America people love conspiracy theories. I'm going to stop here. My name is Olu Osha. I like to talk about American presidents, and I also draw attention to call of law violations, pivoting on subornation of perjury and fraud on the court, which I've been experiencing following a swatting by Montgomery County Police, which dehumanized me, violated my civil rights, my constitutional rights, my human rights. And the police committed robbery under color of law when they raided me based on a perjured emergency evaluation petition by a demented man who perjured, made fabrications and is I was injured, almost killed, and I'm hoping to get justice. I'll keep you posted. Thank you.